Thanks to all of you who have come back for the second session. And welcome to many friends who may be here for the first time, probably having already seen the recordings from that first session. So you know that the first session was about caring for happiness in the present moment. And this session, the theme is caring for suffering in the present moment. How timely, how important these days to take good care of suffering. And one of the ways that we have learned to take care of suffering, especially if it is very large and we don't have sufficient mindfulness to be able to embrace it, is to invite it down back into our store consciousness and invite up happiness. Invite up one of the healthy seeds which bring us happiness. So it may be gratitude, it may be love. And if these seeds are strong, then we can keep them there in our mindfulness, in our consciousness, in our awareness, and continue to feel that positive qualities that are part of us. But they need to be strong, and if we haven't practiced with them, if we haven't invited them up, then they won't be strong enough to stay in our mind consciousness, and some of the negative things that are happening may overwhelm them. So the practice is very important. All practices of happiness equip us to be able to be with suffering in a much more positive way, a much more beneficial way. So we're going to return at the beginning of this session to one of the practices of happiness. And I'd like to start off by rereading the first part of the story that I shared in our last session called Eating a Tangerine. And then we are going to do some eating meditation. So this is a story from Thich Nhat Hanh, from his book, The Miracle of Mindfulness. And it was published in 1975, one of his earliest books. And he says, I remember a number of years ago when Jim and I were first traveling together in the United States. We sat under a tree and shared a tangerine. He began to talk about what we would be doing in the future. Whenever we thought about a project that seemed attractive or inspiring, Jim became so immersed in it that he literally forgot about what he was doing in the present. He popped a section of tangerine into his mouth, and before he had begun chewing it, had another slice ready to pop into his mouth again. He was hardly aware that he was eating a tangerine. All I had to say was, you ought to eat the tangerine section you've already taken. Jim was startled into realizing what he was doing. It was as if he hadn't been eating the tangerine at all. If he had been eating anything, he was eating his future plans. A tangerine has sections. If you can eat just one section, you can probably eat the entire tangerine. But if you can't eat a single section, you cannot eat the tangerine. Jim understood. He slowly put his hand down and focused on the presence of the slice already in his mouth. He chewed it thoughtfully before reaching down and taking another section. This is a perfect introduction to eating meditation. In eating meditation, like in all forms of meditation, we are being present to something. In many kinds of meditation, we're being present to our breath as we breathe. In walking meditation, we're present to our steps and also perhaps our breath at the same time. And in eating meditation, we are being present to the food that we are taking into our mouth and eating, the movement of our mouth as we bite and chew this food, the taste of the food, perhaps even the smell of the aroma of the food as we put it in, and maybe even after we begin eating. We may notice how that food changes in our mouth as we chew it, how it begins to disappear. We may notice that the taste changes as we chew. We may notice that if we move it to different parts of our mouth, the experience of eating is different. And it's an experiment of finding out more about what this act of eating is that we so often take for granted, even if we're eating fine food. So I'm hoping that all of us have some tangerine sections or orange or other slices of fruit with us, and perhaps a napkin or something to dry our hands off afterwards. And we're going to now have that slice of food, that tangerine. So if you will get your fruit ready, peel it and have it ready. And we'll begin just by holding it in our hand, that piece of fruit, and examining it, this piece of fruit that is shortly to become our body. Smell it. Where will this smell go when we put this piece of fruit in our mouth? And when we put it in our mouth and are no longer looking at it, we might close our eyes to intensify our experience of actually tasting it and feeling its textures in our mouth. And we'll slowly chew it and taste the wonderful flavor. And when we no longer experience any of this piece left in our mouth, then and only then will we pick up another slice or another piece. And this will continue for about 5 minutes. And who knows, maybe we'll still be on our first piece when we hear the sound of the bell. So, taking a look and beginning to eat, putting it in our mouth, closing our eyes. Okay, let us finish the mouthful that we have now and prepare to hear the sound of the bell. Okay, can we hear a bell, please? Just notice now what is happening inside of you, having eaten slowly, mindfully. What kinds of thoughts, what kinds of feelings, emotions are you experiencing? Eating meditation is a favorite form of meditation with students, at least in my experience. At my high school, the students typically would like to have a party the day before a vacation. And having a party means eating. So I would tell the students, yes, we can eat, even though that is not something usually permitted in our classroom, but it will be a special kind of eating. And so the next day, someone would bring some cookies that they had baked, and I would bring some juice, and I would explain to them about eating meditation. And it was quite amazing to watch them eating very slowly and mindfully and smiling. It was a different experience than they'd ever had before. One time, at the end of one of these parties, after all but one of the students had left the room, a girl who was about 16 stopped by my desk to thank me. And she said, "Mr. Brady, I have problems with food. And this experience of eating has given me a whole new way of relating to food. And I thank you so much for sharing this with me." So what comes up in our consciousness, in our awareness, of course, depends upon many things. And we're going to look at that now because happiness and suffering experiences come up into our awareness from somewhere. So I'd like to invite Kaira Jewel to share the slide of the model of consciousness that she shared with us in the last session for us to review the Thich Nhat Hanh's explanation and the Buddhist explanation of consciousness. So if we look at this consciousness model, we see that there are two parts in this model. This is the simplified model. So, the store consciousness, which we often think of as the basement, and in 20th century terms or 21st century, we might think of it as this unconscious. And the mind consciousness, or the living room, which is what represents our awareness, what we are aware of. So many things are taken into our mind, into our consciousness, without our awareness, and they go directly to the store. If you recall, in the store, what is being stored are many different seeds. And you see in this particular diagram the seeds of compassion, anger, fear, love, peace, joy. And there's another seed which is not shown here, which is the seed of mindfulness. There are many seeds that are not shown here. So if something happens, comes into our awareness that is, for example, eating, we start eating and we focus our attention on eating, and we're really appreciating what is going on in our mind as we're eating. Joy comes up. Joy or happiness comes up. And we have that feeling of happiness. And that experience of watering the seed of joy, of happiness, strengthens that seed down in our store consciousness, so that the next time we do something, or the future times that we are doing things that invite up joy, it's more intense, it's stronger, and it may stick around longer because that seed is becoming a stronger seed. So this is the importance of practice, to strengthen these positive seeds. And when they are strong, we can invite them up, even when some fairly negative things are happening. We can, as Kaira Joel explained last week, when she was talking about right diligence or wise diligence, we become able to invite negative seeds that have come up in the mind consciousness to go back to the store and be replaced by positive seeds. In the cable television model of consciousness, this is called changing the channel. So this awareness that we have, which is our living room, many things might come into our awareness that can impact which seeds come up from our store consciousness. There are 4 kinds of things that we might be aware of in our mind consciousness. Sensory input. So as you were eating your piece of fruit, you were getting the input of the taste and the texture, and you were getting, before that you'd gotten a visual input of what it looked like. We're getting all kinds of input, and we don't need to look at that right now. Thanks, Joel. Another thing that we can become aware of are bodily sensations. So while you were eating, you had awareness of chewing and perhaps a little of digestion. There are many bodily sensations that we may become aware of, but often they're below the radar. Things like our heartbeat and our breath, muscular tension. These things are all going on, and they can become part of our awareness. A third thing would be the thoughts that we are having. Often our thinking is also unconscious because we're in the middle of doing something and we're not even aware of the flow of thoughts. It's kind of like a motion picture that is showing constantly in our mind. And it's only when we stop and just pay attention to what's going on in the living room, in the mind consciousness, do we actually see that there's thinking that's been going on all along. And similarly, emotional states may be present, but completely undetected. And it's only when we stop that we realize that there is an emotional state that is happening in that moment. So these things are happening, can be happening in the store consciousness, not in awareness, or they can be happening in our mind consciousness. And what is happening in our consciousness comes under the term, is described by the term a mental formation. What happened while we were all eating our piece of fruit was a series of mental formations that had a variety of qualities. It was, it may have been, hopefully it had a pleasurable quality. There was the specifics of how it tasted. There were other things that went into that mental formation, which had to do with our memories of eating fruit. That piece of fruit in particular, that type of fruit, which may have been very pleasurable in the past. Sometimes when we're eating, our memories are not so positive about what we're eating. Or sometimes our experience of eating doesn't live up to the memories that we have because we've lost some of our sense of taste. So it's a very complex mental formation that has to do not only with the present moment, but but is colored by things that are in our unconscious that are associated with the act or what is happening in the present moment. There are not just mental formations, there are physical formations. There's the actual piece of fruit itself. There is our body itself. And these physical formations and these mental formations come together in miraculous ways to create in our experience of existence. When there are many kinds of experiences that we have that don't seem to be particularly positive or negative. For many of us, eating a piece of fruit may be, especially if we're engaged in plans, may be a completely neutral experience and one that we don't even pay attention to. And so bringing our attention to the act of eating a section of tangerine, as Thich Nhat Hanh invited his young friend Jim to do, is to invite him to bring mindfulness to this act. And so what was an act that was neutral, that was unnoticed, all of a sudden became something much more than that. It became his total world for that moment when he was eating that slice of tangerine. And we begin to notice when we bring our mindfulness to our experiences that a lot of the things that we don't particularly see as positive or as important take on almost a sacred quality while we're with them. And as I said last session, There are so many sources of happiness that are available to us, but how many of us stop and look at the clouds, look at them move, stop and listen to the birds, and really just stop and appreciate the miracle that is all around us? So I want to, in this vein, I want to bring up a term which some of you are very familiar with, and which is one of the key teachings of mindfulness, and that is the term causes and conditions. Mental formations arise in our awareness because the causes and conditions support them. So when we begin to talk about suffering, often there's some very good reasons that suffering might arise in our awareness, because there's some very negative things that are happening, unfortunately, on this planet. No matter where we're living, I'm very aware of them here in the United States. And to this experience of this objective experience of what is happening with the pandemic, with racism, with climate change, I bring all of the seeds that are in my store consciousness. And what is a challenge, what is negative, could be met in quite a variety of ways. And certainly it has been in my case, and in the case of those who are close to me. Sometimes negative things are met with despair. Some negative things are met with fear. Some are met with anger. Some are met with grief. All these things are quite understandable. But negative things that arise for us can also be met with as challenges, as calls to action, as a source of compassion, as something to learn from. So all of the way in which we meet the negative seeds coming to us can depend in large part on what we have nourished in the past, which seeds we have strengthened. So I'd like to now ask Kaira to please share the slide that describes the 4 different kinds of nutrients with which we nourish our consciousness. So as we look at this, we see the first nutrient that we take in is edible food. And the kind of foods that we eat and drinks that we drink can be healthy or they can be toxic for us. And if we begin to pay more attention to our eating, we may notice things about it, about the food, about our habits of eating and drinking, that might suggest that we change our diets. The next sense impression is, the next nutrient is, are our sense impressions. Things that we take in visually, things that we take in, the conversations that we're hearing, the smells, all of the sense impressions. So I think we all know, well, maybe we don't all know this, but I've learned that walking into a faculty room cannot be healthy for me if the kind of discussions that are going on are very negative. They can be toxic for me, and it's best for me not to listen to those unless I'm in a very good state and feel like seeing that I can create a different kind of environment. I will leave. I will just walk out. I'm retired now, so I don't have that kind of challenge. The third kind of nutrient that we take in is volition or intention. So, for example, when Jim was eating his first slice of tangerine, what he was really doing, what he was wanting to do, was just plan. When Thich Nhat Hanh spoke to him about what he was doing and called his attention to it, his intention changed to that of being with the slice that was in his mouth and paying his full awareness, full attention to his act of eating. And that changed for him what was going on. And it watered his seed of mindfulness, because he was bringing mindfulness of the present moment to bear. The fourth of the nutrients is consciousness. And consciousness refers to thoughts and feelings. So you may think, well, why are thoughts and feelings nutrients? Well, what we think, whatever comes up in our mind, consciousness, creates certain conditions that nourish seeds in our store consciousness. So, as I've been saying, if we are calling up happy thoughts into our awareness, our happiness seed is being nourished. If negative thoughts are coming up, then our negative seeds are being nourished. So we can take some we need to be careful with what we're doing in terms of what we're being aware of. And let me just, this is a kind of a complicated, okay. So I'd like to turn to that question of what do we do with the negative things that are coming at us these days, by reading the last part of the story about the tangerine. Now, I have a friend who wrote me after the last session and said she had a deep realization from reading this story and journaling on it. And she was very familiar with the story, but something new really hit her. And I immediately knew that it had to do with the end of the story, which I'll read now. So Thich Nhat Hanh concludes, later, when Jim went to prison for activities against the war, that's the war in Vietnam, I was worried about whether he could endure the four walls of prison and sent him a very short letter. Do you remember the tangerine we shared when we were together? Your being there is like the tangerine. Eat it and be one with it. Tomorrow, it will be no more. Well, when I looked at that again, all of a sudden, I saw that Thich Nhat Hanh was talking to me about being sequestered. It was about being imprisoned in our own homes, not being able to go out or not going out very far. And it was just like his advice to Jim to tell us this time that we're experiencing, some of us are still experiencing it quite strongly, is going to last, but it's going to end. And how are we looking at it? What are the thoughts that we are coming up around it? What volition do we have about being with or not being with this challenging time that we're in right now? And Thich Nhat Hanh was saying, let's just be with whatever it is that's there. Let us learn to be with it. Let us learn to understand it more deeply, understand ourselves more deeply, rather than have our mind constantly critiquing it or making plans for what we're going to do when it's over, or anything but really being with where we are. So this is really a deep teaching. It's not just about eating oranges, it's also about being imprisoned. And we're getting that teaching now. And we have an opportunity to respond to it in whatever ways that we're able to bring to bear. So I'd like to finish this section by sharing a poem that I wrote. And it's about being with suffering. When I became a teacher in Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition, I was asked to present a poem to him about some insight. And I ended up deciding that I wanted to write and present a poem on freedom. Because in my own life, I'd experienced suffering of various kinds, and I knew that freedom was something that was possible because I saw in Thich Nhat Hanh an example of a person who was free. And I wanted to understand freedom more deeply. So I talked to a lot of friends about freedom, but I didn't hear anything that provoked an insight. And so eventually I took this question to Ted, who was and continues to be my therapist, that I now can talk with from time to time. But he also was a practitioner of mindfulness in Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition, and he gave me some very valuable insights from time to time. So this time we talked, and at the end of the session, he wrote down on his pad, freedom from and freedom to. And he said, take this home, think about it, and see what comes to you. Well, if you had this homework assignment, I'm sure that you would have an easy time thinking of things that you'd like to be free from in your life today, and things that you would like to be free to do, or free to be. And I had an easy time. I put in 2 things on each category, and I didn't learn anything. It was all things that I knew. So I came back and shared my disappointment, but then several days later, I woke up and I realized that there was a third kind of freedom. And with this realization came this poem, which is very unusual for me. I don't write very many poems. But this is the poem. It's called This Freedom. This freedom. Not freedom from childhood habits, from childhood fears. Not freedom to open to the love surrounding me, to know and live my truth. This freedom with habits, with fears, with heart protected truth hidden deep inside. This freedom with this moment, just as it is. So this is a freedom that helps clear out a lot of space inside, that helps us accept things as they are so that we can go on and act in a healthy way, a free way, a way that's free in spite of all the things that we would really like to have be different.
So, dear friends, we are going to keep going. So I will continue with this exploration of how we can take good care of our suffering. And it's really good to hear you share, Richard, about your experience of holding and caring for suffering and understanding it. So I'll return to this model of the mind, of the store consciousness and mind consciousness. And I'll just show the slide from last session of the 4 aspects of wise diligence, so that we can focus in on the 4th one, because we're going to explore how the 4th aspect of wise diligence, which is to care for suffering when it arises, so that it can go back down to store consciousness, so that it doesn't get stronger, so we're not nourishing a habit of suffering. I'm then going to go into what are the steps for how to take care of suffering when it comes into mind consciousness, when it rises up from store consciousness into mind consciousness. So we learned this in the last session when we talked about nourishing, taking care of our happiness, about bringing up the wholesome seeds and keeping them in our mind as long as possible so they would grow stronger at the root and be more likely to come up. And then the 3rd and 4th are sort of mirror images of the first 2 as they relate to suffering. So not allowing the whole unwholesome seeds to be watered, and then when they do arise, to take care of them, to help hold them so that they don't take over our mind, and that we can, change the channel, as Richard was saying, and help our suffering return to store consciousness as soon as possible. So here we have a breakdown of how we take care of our suffering, so that as soon as the seed of suffering arises, we need to call up mindfulness. So down in the soil, there are many seeds. When a seed of fear or anger or judgment or guilt or shame or jealousy, what we need to do is bring up mindfulness from the store consciousness. If this is our seed of suffering, we bring up mindfulness, and mindfulness recognizes and embraces and takes care of this seed of suffering. We don't leave the seed of suffering alone in our store consciousness. We bring up mindfulness to hold it and care for it. So the first way we can do this is to be aware of our breathing as soon as we have a painful emotion arising. Breathing in, I know I'm worried. Breathing out, I see this is worry. So we recognize that suffering is there. So often suffering can be arising and we're not aware of it. So we get irritated and we just start doing things out of irritation, or we feel some dislike for something, and without even being conscious, we're moving away from that thing, or we're starting to talk badly about people, to other people about that person who's irritating us, and we're not even aware of the original emotion of irritation or anger. It's already taken us over, and we've become the anger. So we're speaking the words of anger. We're looking with the eyes of anger. We're listening with the ears of anger. But if we can bring up mindfulness, as soon as anger arises, then we have a chance to be more than just our anger. Anger can be there. We're not suppressing it. But we also bring up mindfulness so that something is there to be with and take care of the anger. So that's the first step, is to recognize that the suffering has arisen so that it doesn't take us over. So we first want to recognize that suffering is there, and then we have a tendency to push away suffering because it's painful, and that's very natural and human. But it's possible, because mindfulness is there, that we can actually open to our suffering and give it space to be there, accept it, and not try to push it away. As soon as we do this, as soon as we don't fight it, it stops being so so intense. So there's this teaching that whatever we resist persists. It's like as soon as an emotion feels that we want to get rid of it, it gets stronger, right? It's just like when you are arguing with someone, you tell them, no, that's wrong. And then of course they want to defend themselves and say, hey, that's, so they get even more attached to their view because you've pushed them and said that they, that they're wrong. So it's the same with our emotions. We tell them that they're wrong, and then they want to demand that they be seen and that they be acknowledged. So if we can accept that they're there, we stop that fight. We don't get into a war with ourselves. So we accept that the suffering is there. This is a very human thing. All of the seeds. This is what's so powerful about this image, about the seeds. Everyone has all of the seeds. Everyone has all the seeds of suffering. Everyone has all the seeds of well-being, of joy, of ease. So when the suffering seeds arise, we don't need to take it personally that I'm somehow wrong or bad or especially unique because I have rising. We can smile to it and say, yes, You're part of the human experience too. Welcome. I open my heart to understand you as well. And that's one of the things, the beautiful things about mindfulness. That's what it is mindful of. Mindfulness is happy to be mindful of our joy and the beauty in life, and it's also happy to be aware of our pain and our difficulties and our challenges. So the seed of suffering is there, mindfulness comes and recognizes it, and then mindfulness starts to get closer to it and bring acceptance. Say, yeah, you're here, it's okay, you can be here. Just like when a child or a baby is crying and suffering, mindfulness is like a caretaker that comes and holds that child and rocks that child and soothes that child. So rather than saying, oh, no, these things in me are so bad, they're so terrible, I don't want to see them, which doesn't help the baby that's crying, mindfulness is like that caretaker saying, oh, you're crying, let me be here for you, let me take care of you. So we can learn to see these suffering parts of ourselves as a crying child that just needs care. So once we've accepted that our pain is there, that we're not wrong, we're not bad, the pain isn't wrong, isn't bad for existing, it just is. And then the third step is to embrace it, to really hold it, to rock it, to soothe it. And even in sitting meditation, sometimes when a seed of suffering arises, I might even sit with my arms like I'm cradling a child, and I'll just hold my suffering and I'll say, yes, I'm embracing you, I'm here for you, I'm gonna take good care of you, and there's nothing wrong with you, I'm here for you. And so this embracing is this turning toward with all of our heart to say, this is painful. Let me see how I can make room for this and allow this fully in and really hold this experience with care. Tend to this experience, just like we tend to our garden, just like we tend to someone who's ill. We tend to our suffering. We say, yes, this needs my care, this needs my attention, not to be pushed away or judged. So it's like many people with coronavirus, they need to be embraced, they need to be held, to be healed, not pushed away because they're ill and, we don't want them. They're ill, so it's already happened. So how can we embrace? How can we take care? So then once we've embraced the emotion starts to shift. It's like it's penetrated by a kind of light. Mindfulness is a kind of light, and it shifts. Just like when a flower is penetrated by sunlight, it starts to open, it starts to reveal itself in the warmth of the sun. So our emotion, which might have been quite tight, quite crowded, quite contracted, with the light of mindfulness, it begins to open like a flower, and we can understand it in a different way. We can look deeply into it. We can see, oh, I see this petal of the flower. I see my anger is related to something that happened to me as a child, or some anger I saw from my parents, or this anger actually isn't about that person. It's about some insecurity that I have, or we see this petal, and this petal reveals, oh, actually, my jealousy is about, this thing that I don't feel good about in myself. And so, something starts to reveal itself, and we begin to understand our emotion. We begin to look deeply into it and see it more at its root. And emotions are quite layered and complex, and they hold a lot of wisdom. That's why it's so important to go through these steps and to, receive the gift of each of these strong and difficult emotions, rather than, if we try to push them away, we don't get the learning, we don't get the gift of the transformation of these experiences. It's like, all of our kitchen or yard waste that's organic, that's, from food, if we throw all that away, it doesn't get to become rich compost. It can help us to fertilize our garden and make our trees and plants healthy. If we just throw them away, they can't become, this resource for us. But if we take the time to compost our organic waste, it becomes kind of what's called black gold. It makes the most wonderful things manifest. So it's the same for our suffering. So if we can hold it, be with it, it begins to reveal itself to us. And in that looking deeply, we get insights into who we are. We see deeper than the surface layer of what we think is going on. And we learn to look deeper and deeper into the true reality, and that frees us. So when we look deeply, transformation of suffering arises naturally. We don't make transformation happen. It just arises when we begin to see deeply into the nature of our suffering, into the depths of our mind. So there's even a book called Transformation at the Base. So it means as we understand the roots of our anger, the roots of our fear, the roots of our discrimination, in this process, this fourth aspect of wise diligence, taking good care of our suffering, the seeds in our store consciousness actually change. They get smaller, they become less easy to arise, because in this is like giving our seeds of suffering a bath of mindfulness. It's like keeping good circulation in our psyche. The suffering arises and we know it right away. We respond to it, we take care of it. And then at the root, down in store consciousness, that seed fundamentally changes every time we hold it with awareness, with mindfulness, with clear seeing. It doesn't have the same, it loses its intensity each time we do this, and it causes us to be less reactive in the future when this emotion will arise again. So I'll just stop the share. So I want to also share about another way we can practice being with our suffering. And then we'll do a little practice. We'll get to experience this in a practice. And this is a beautiful metaphor that Thich Nhat Hanh has shared with us about how to go through an emotional storm when we are overwhelmed by a very strong emotion. We can come down into the base of our bodies to calm ourselves. So the image is of a tree. It's a big, strong tree, very tall branches, big, thick, very robust trunk. And in a storm, the winds and the rains are beating and, really whipping up against this tree. And the top branches are swaying back and forth. And that's a metaphor for the level of our mind. That when we stay at the level of our thoughts and we're thinking and our emotions are creating more thoughts, our minds are all over the place. And I'm sure we all have had that experience of being in an emotional storm where we don't think straight, we don't think correctly, we don't perceive things the way they are. We're very reactive, and we say and do things we wouldn't normally say and do because we're so charged emotionally. But in a storm, if you look down at the trunk of this really strong big tree, you don't see the trunk moving back and forth. The trunk is stable and steady and solid. And the same is true with us. If we leave this level of our thoughts and mind and we come down to the belly and we just feel our breath in the belly, we can do it lying down. I like to encourage people to put like a book or even a little kilo bag of rice or something that's with a bit of weight on the belly if you lie down, and just feel the rising and falling of the belly as we breathe. Just that. And that helps us to take all the energy down from the tops of the trees and bring it to an anchoring place, a place that can anchor us in the present moment. All of those thoughts in an emotional storm, they're usually not about the present moment. They're, fixated, anxious about the future. They're regretful or, resentful of things in the past. But we can really, as Richard was saying about this teaching of Thai to Jim, that when he goes into prison, if he remembers this teaching of the tangerine, he can keep his freshness, his balance of mind. So that's a practice, is coming back to the present. Just feel what's happening in this moment. That's what this is, of coming down to feel the trunk of the tree, our belly. So let's try this out, and it's something that you're going to get a chance to share with someone as your practice for the time between this session and the next session. So I invite you to find a position that will support you. We'll just do this for a few minutes. You can sit or you can lie down. So just choose what will support you. And noticing your in-breath, noticing your out-breath. Focusing all of your attention down at your belly and feeling the belly rising and falling. And feeling the belly expanding and retracting with each breath. If you're seated and if it's comfortable and helpful, you could bring a hand or two hands to your belly just to help really bring your attention there. Feeling the warmth of your hands over your belly. Belly expanding, belly retracting. So now become aware of any difficult or painful feelings in your mind or body. So maybe there's something that's happened that you can bring to mind. But if you have none right now, that's fine. It's good to learn this practice when you're calm, so you can be better prepared the next time a strong emotion arises. But if there is something, just notice what it is. Just as we spoke about, let mindfulness come up and recognize the painful experience in the body or in the mind. Now imagine that you are a tree. Your belly is like the trunk of the tree. And the strong feeling of anger or hurt or sadness is like a storm, making the branches up high sway all about in the wind. come back down to the trunk of the tree, to your belly, where it's stable and safe, down at the trunk of your tree. There's no need to think about what happened in this situation that created the painful emotion. Just being aware of your breathing, of your belly rising and falling. Bringing this heart of accepting and embracing to this painful feeling, if you can. Yes, I'm here for you, and it's okay that you're there. I won't push you away. I won't judge you or try to suppress you. Breathing in, I calm this strong feeling. Breathing out, I can even smile to this strong emotion. Maybe there's a smile that wants to come in response to this painful feeling. Stay breathing in and breathing out. Stay with the trunk of the tree. There's still a storm going on. The strong emotion is still there, but we continue breathing in and out, deeply, slowly, the belly rising and the belly falling. Down at the trunk of our tree, we can breathe and feel safe. And the storm will eventually pass. And we'll close listening to the sound of the bell. Thank you for your practice. So, we'll share a poem now, and I'll read this poem, and you may have this poem also that was sent to you that you can pull up after I've read it, and then we'll offer some time for you to reflect on the poem and journal about it for a few minutes. Richard, maybe is it good that I pull up the poem for people to see as I'm reading it? I can do a screen share.
I think either way, whatever feels right to you in this moment. Yeah.
Okay. I'll pull it up and share the screen. So this is a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye, who's a Palestinian American poet. And I'll read it. Kindness. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. So we'll take about 5 minutes now for you to reflect with this poem and to journal about anything that arises from the exploration we've been making together this session on caring for suffering, but especially anything that is touched in you, anything that strikes you from this poem. So I'll leave the poem up and turn off my video and sound, and then in 5 minutes you'll hear a bell and we'll come back. Dear friends, taking a moment to finish your writing, your reflecting. And we'll close our session with a song about kindness. This song is in English, but we'll offer you the words in your language after. What is the greatest? What is the greatest? What is the greatest wisdom of all? What is the greatest? What is the greatest? What is the greatest wisdom of all? Kindness, kindness, that is the greatest wisdom of all. Kindness, kindness, that is the greatest wisdom of all. So we will send you off with the encouragement to keep reflecting on and practicing kindness as you go throughout your week, your days. But especially, we invite you to share with your partner that you've selected for this course, to share the practice of the tree in the storm. So you'll guide your partner or a group, if you have a group of people, in this practice of identifying a suffering, a difficult emotion, and then helping those you're guiding to come into the body and down to the trunk of the tree. So we'll be sending you that in a follow-up email, the text, to practice that. And we're really happy to be with you once more, and we look forward to our time together in 2 weeks. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, a good day.